Tonight, we walk a quiet road to a workshop where lanterns are mended. The lamp burns steady on the bench. The fire glows in the stove. And the work continues, slow and patient, through the long, dark hours. The lane curved gently between two low hills, and the light was beginning to change. It was that hour when the sky holds several colors at once, when the day releases its grip, and something softer takes its place. The road was unpaved here, just packed earth and small stones, worn smooth by years of quiet passage. On either side, tall grasses leaned slightly in the breeze. They made a soft rushing sound, like water moving somewhere far away. The air smelled of cooling earth and the faint sweetness of wild herbs growing along the verge. A traveler walked this road, though there was no hurry in their step. The kind of walking that has no particular destination in mind, only the pleasure of moving through a peaceful place as evening settles in. Ahead, the road dipped into a small valley where a cluster of buildings sat low against the hillside. Smoke rose from one chimney, thin and unhurried, dissolving into the darkening sky. The buildings were old in the way that comfortable things become old. Stone walls softened by moss. Wooden shutters, weathered to a silver gray. Roof lines that sagged slightly in the middle, settling into themselves over long years. The largest building had a sign hanging from an iron bracket, though the words had faded beyond reading. What remained was the shape of a lantern, painted in gold leaf, that still caught the last of the daylight. It swung gently on its chain, creaking in a rhythm that seemed to match the breeze. This was the workshop of someone who mended lanterns. Not the modern kind with batteries and switches, but the older sort. Oil lanterns with brass fittings. Hurricane lamps with curved glass chimneys. Railway lanterns built to withstand rough journeys. Carriage lamps with beveled pane. Each one designed to hold a small flame, steady against wind and weather. The traveler paused at the edge of the village, watching the smoke rise from that single chimney. There was no sound of machinery, no bustle of commerce. Only the wind in the grass and somewhere, very faintly, the clink of metal against metal coming from within. The road continued down into the valley, passing between a small inn with dark windows and a cottage where someone had planted hollyhocks along the fence. The flowers were closed now, their tall stalks swaying slightly. In morning, they would open again, but for now they rested. Everything here seemed to rest. The buildings, the road, the few scattered trees with their branches still against the quiet sky. Even the smoke from the chimney rose without urgency, taking its time to reach whatever height it was seeking. Beyond the village, a stream could be heard, though not quite seen. It ran somewhere behind the workshop, its voice a constant murmur beneath all other sounds. Water finding its way through the valley, as it had for longer than anyone could remember. The workshop door stood open to the evening air. Through it came a warm glow, the color of honey, the color of late summer afternoons remembered in winter. This was lamplight, of course. The lantern mender worked by the light of the very things they repaired. Inside, visible through the doorway, shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling. And on those shelves, lanterns of every description waited in patient rows. Some were whole and gleaming, their brass polished bright. Others sat in various states of disrepair, missing glass or dented, their wicks blackened and trimmed down to nothing. A workbench ran beneath a single window, a large mullioned affair with small panes of old glass that warped the view slightly. On this bench, tools lay arranged in careful order. Pliers of different sizes, small hammers with heads worn smooth, rolls of wick material in various widths, jars of oil, polishing cloths folded into neat squares, a magnifying glass on a brass stand, containers of screws and fittings sorted by size. The lantern mender sat at this bench, bent over their work. The task at hand was a railway lantern, the kind once hung at the back of the last car on long trains crossing the countryside. Its red glass was intact, but the burner mechanism had seized with age and disuse. Careful hands worked a small drop of oil into the frozen parts, waiting, working again. There was no conversation here, no radio playing, no distraction of any kind. Only the work and the quiet and the evening settling around the workshop like a familiar blanket. The traveler stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. The warm air that drifted out smelled of lamp oil and metal polish and something else, something harder to name. The smell of patience, perhaps. The smell of things being tended with care. A nod of acknowledgement passed between them, nothing more. The lantern mender returned to their work and the traveler stepped inside, finding a wooden stool near the door where visitors had apparently sat before. The wood was worn smooth from use, the legs slightly uneven, so that it rocked gently when White shifted. The workshop continued about its evening business, which is to say, it continued being still. The only movement was the hands of the lantern mender, working with small precise motions on the railway lamp. Outside, the light continued its slow fade from gold to gray to something deeper. On the shelf nearest the door, a row of carriage lamps waited for attention. They were matched pairs, meant to hang on either side of vehicles that no longer traveled the roads. Their brass frames had gone dark with tarnish, but the bones of them were solid. Given time and care, they would shine again. Time and care seemed to be what this place had in abundance. No schedules posted on the wall. No pile of urgent orders waiting. Just the lanterns in their rows, the tools in their places, and the long, slow work of mending things that still had use in them. The stream continued its murmur behind the building. The smoke continued rising from the chimney. The sign, with its painted lantern, continued swinging gently in the evening breeze. And gradually, without announcement, night began to settle over the valley. A small iron stove sat in the corner of the workshop, its door open just enough to show the glow of coals within. It gave off a steady warmth that took the edge from the cooling air without making the room too warm. The kind of heat that invites stillness rather than sleep. The lantern mender had finished with the railway lamp and set it aside on a cloth. The mechanism moved freely now, the wick rising and lowering as it should. Tomorrow, it would be tested with oil and flame, but for tonight, the repair was done. New work was selected from the waiting shelves. A hurricane lamp this time, its glass chimney cracked from top to bottom. Someone had brought it wrapped in newspaper, an old lamp that had seen decades of use in a farmhouse kitchen. The crack ran in a gentle curve, as if the glass had simply decided to part ways with itself. Replacement glass waited in a cabinet beneath the workbench. Chimneys of various sizes, some clear, and some with a slight amber tint. The lantern mender searched through them with unhurried patience, holding each one up to the lamp base, checking the fit. The wrong chimney would sit crooked or allow drafts that made the flame gutter. The right one would nestle into place as if it had always belonged there. After some time, a match was found. The new chimney was clear glass with a slightly thicker base than the original, but the fit was true. It would serve well. The cracked chimney was set aside, not discarded. Glass could be melted down and reformed, nothing wasted. The hurricane lamp was reassembled piece by piece. The base that held the oil, the burner with its adjustable wick, the frame that held the chimney in place. Small screws tightened with a worn screwdriver, the whole thing coming together in the hands of the lantern mender like a puzzle whose solution was already known. When finished, the lamp was given a turn of the wick adjuster. The mechanism responded smoothly, raising the cotton strip just enough to show above the burner. Satisfied, the lantern mender lowered it again and set the lamp with others that were ready for their owners to collect. The traveler watched this work from the stool by the door. There was something restful in the observation. The way each task flowed into the next without hurry. The way the hands of the lantern mender knew exactly where to reach for each tool without looking. The way silence held the space without becoming uncomfortable. Outside the window, full darkness had arrived. The glass panes showed only reflections now. The workshop multiplied in miniature across their surfaces. The lanterns on their shelves appeared in the glass like ghost lights, their brass frames catching the glow of the working lamp. The working lamp itself sat at the center of the bench, a tall brass affair with a wide base and a chimney that had gone slightly smoky on one side. It cast a pool of light that encompassed the work area and left the rest of the room in gentle shadow. Kind of shadow that feels like privacy rather than concealment. From somewhere in the back of the workshop came the sound of a clock. Not chiming, just ticking. A steady pulse that had been there all along, but only now became noticeable in the deeper quiet of night. It marked time without urgency, each tick arriving when it arrived, each talk following in its own good time. The lantern mender rose from the bench and stretched slowly, arms reaching upward, spine releasing the curve of close work. Then a walk to the back of the workshop, past shelves of lanterns, past cabinets of supplies, to a small alcove where a kettle sat on a spirit burner. Water was poured from a ceramic jug. A match struck. The blue flame of the burner caught and began its quiet work of heating the kettle. The lantern mender stood waiting, watching the flame, as unhurried in this task as in all others. There was a small ritual to the tea making that followed. Warming the pot with a splash of hot water, measuring leaves from a tin canister, pouring the boiling water in a slow stream, setting the pot aside to steep beneath a quilted cozy. Small actions performed with the same care given to the lantern work. 2 cups were prepared. Mismatched ceramics, one blue with a chip at the rim, one cream colored with a pattern of faded flowers. The traveler accepted theirs with a nod of thanks. The tea was dark and slightly bitter, exactly right for an evening of watching someone work. The lantern mender returned to the bench with their cups set safely aside, away from the tools and supplies. A new project was selected. This one was a lamp for miners, the kind with a heavy base and a protective cage around the flame. The gauge that controlled airflow had stuck, and the reflector behind the wick had gone dull with age. First, the lamp was disassembled completely, each part laid out on a clean cloth in the order of removal. The cage unscrewed from the base. The burner lifted free. The reflector removed from its bracket. The gauge mechanism extracted with small pliers, everything set in a row like archaeological finds awaiting study. The reflector received attention first. It was brass beneath the tarnish, a curved piece designed to throw light forward into the darkness of underground places. A soft cloth was dampened with polish, and then the slow circular motion began. Working from the center outward, the lantern mender brought small sections of the brass back to brightness. This was not quick work. Each pass of the cloth revealed only a slight improvement. The tarnish had been building for years, perhaps decades. It would not surrender all at once. But gradually, ring by ring of circular motion, the brass remembered what it had been. A mirror for flame. A multiplier of light. There was something meditative in the repetition. The same motion, over and over, with only the smallest visible change each time. Like watching clouds move across the sky or water wear its stone. Outside, the night had grown fully dark. No light showed in the village now, except from this workshop, and a single lamp in the window of the inn across the way. The two lights held their ground against the darkness, small and steady and sufficient. The clock in the back continued its patient ticking. The fire in the small stove had settled to a bed of coals that glowed red when the draft shifted. The working lamp on the bench burned without flicker, its wick trimmed to exactly the right height. The lantern mender finished with the reflector and held it up to the light. It gleamed now, a curve of gold that caught the lamplight and threw it back, intensified. Tomorrow, it would be fitted back into the lamp for miners, and the lamp would work again as it was meant to. Light into darkness. Safety in uncertain places. But that's the work of tomorrow. For now, the reflector was set aside and the next part taken up. The gauge mechanism, frozen with old oil and dust. Another patient task, another quiet hour ahead. The rain arrived without announcement. One moment, the night was simply dark, and the next, there was a soft pattering against the workshop windows. Not a storm, nothing dramatic. Just rain falling as rain does, finding its way down from clouds that had gathered while no one was watching. The sound changed the quality of the silence in the workshop. Where before there had been only the tick of the clock and the small sounds of work, now there was this additional layer. A constant gentle percussion against glass and stone and the shingled roof above. It made the warmth inside feel warmer, the light feel brighter. The lantern mender paused in their work to listen. Head tilted slightly, eyes focused on nothing in particular. Just listening to the rain. Then a small nod, as if the weather had said something agreeable, and the work resumed. The gauge mechanism had begun to move again. The old oil had been cleaned away with a cloth, dampened in solvent, and fresh oil applied to the moving parts. Now the dial turned smoothly, regulating the flow of air to where the flame would burn. From fully closed to fully open, and back again. The motion was easy now. The traveler had finished their tea and set the cup aside. The warmth of the drink had settled in, a comfortable weight that made sitting still feel natural. The rain continued its quiet conversation with the building, and there was nowhere else that needed to be, nothing else that needed to be done. More parts of the lamp for miners received attention. The wick holder was cleaned and fitted with fresh cotton. The base was wiped down and checked for leaks. The cage was examined for any damage that might let flame escape where it should not. Each part handled with familiarity, with knowledge built over years of similar work. The shelves of lanterns seemed to glow more warmly in the rain, soft darkness. Brass caught lamplight. Glass reflected it. The accumulated weighting of dozens of lamps, each one a small story of where it had been and what light it had given before arriving here. Some of these lamps had come from attics and basements found during house clearings after someone had passed on. Others had been brought by people who remembered using them in childhood, who wanted to see them work again. A few had been found in antique shops and flea markets, bought by collectors who appreciated the craft of their making. Each lamp that left this workshop would carry light back into the world. Kitchen tables illuminated during power outages. Porches lit on summer evenings. Camping trips where the hiss of a gas lantern mixed with the sounds of wind and water. Holiday gatherings where old lamps were brought out for their warm glow and the memories they held. But here, in the workshop, they simply waited. Patient rows of brass and glass and iron. Familiar shapes from an era when flame was the only light available after dark. Now they were remnants, but still useful. Still capable of doing what they were made to do. The lantern mender began reassembling the lamp for miners. Each part returned to its place in reverse order from how it had been removed. The reflector first, now gleaming. Then the burner mechanism, the gauge that controlled airflow, the protective cage, each piece fitting with others, the whole becoming more than its parts. When finished, the lamp looked much as it had when it arrived. The same heavy base, the same sturdy cage. But now it worked. The gauge turned freely. The wick adjusted smoothly. The reflector threw back light like a small mirror, ready again for whatever darkness it might be asked to enter. This was set with the other finished repairs, and the lantern mender leaned back in the chair for a moment. The workbench held the evidence of the evening efforts. Polish cloths stained with tarnish, small jars of oil and solvent, tools displaced slightly from their careful arrangement. All of it would be tidied later, but for now it could simply be. The traveler had grown drowsy in the warmth and the sound of the rain. The wooden stool had become more comfortable than it had any right to be, or perhaps tiredness had simply softened its edges. Eyes half closed, watching the lantern mender through the soft filter of approaching sleep. The workshop held them both in its quiet embrace. The walls that had stood for generations. The ceiling beams darkened by decades of lamp smoke. The floor worn smooth by countless footsteps to and from the workbench. Everything in this place had been shaped by time and use, settled into itself like a stone in a stream. The clock in the back continued ticking. The rain continued falling. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers that pulsed with a deep red glow. The working lamp burned steadily, its flame visible through the glass chimney as a small bright point that did not waver. The lantern mender rose quietly and moved to the stove, adding a few small pieces of wood to the coals. They caught slowly, smoke rising first, then small flames licking at the dry bark. The warmth in the room steadied and held. A blanket was retrieved from a chest near the door and offered to the traveler. Wool, faded from many washings, soft from long use. It smelled faintly of cedar and lamp oil, the characteristic scents of this place. The traveler accepted it with murmured thanks and drew it around their shoulders. The night had reached that hour when time seems to slow. The rain fell with a hypnotic steadiness. The fire murmured in the stove. The lanterns on their shelves held perfectly still, each one a small monument to waiting. The lantern mender had taken up lighter work now. A cloth and a jar of polish moving slowly along the shelf nearest the workbench. Each lantern received a pass of the cloth, a gentle buffing that removed dust and left a subtle shine. Not urgent work. Just tending. Just care given to things that deserved it. The first lantern on this shelf was a simple oil lamp, the kind that might have sat on a kitchen table a century ago. Its glass base held traces of blue, a color that would glow when the lamp was filled and lit. The brass fittings had a patina that spoke of years of handling, of fingers adjusting the wick, of palms warming against the glass on cold nights. The next was a larger lantern with a wooden handle made to be carried from room to room. Its glass chimney was slightly yellowed with age, but free of cracks. The reservoir for oil was brass, engraved with a pattern of leaves that had worn almost smooth in places. Someone had loved this lamp once, had carried it through dark houses, had trusted its light to show the way. And the next, and the next. Each one receiving the slow attention of the cloth. Each one acknowledged, cared for, set back in its place to continue waiting. The work made almost no sound, just the soft brush of cotton against metal and glass. The traveler had surrendered to drowsiness now. The blanket drawn close. Eyes closed, or nearly so. The sounds of the workshop blending into a single continuous murmur that asked nothing and offered only rest. The rain had gentled, though it still fell. The drops came slower now, the sound against the windows more scattered. Tomorrow, the village would wake to wet grass and puddles reflecting the morning sky, but that was far away. Now, there was only this hour, this workshop, this fire and lamplight and rain. The lantern mender finished with the shelf and returned the cloth and polish to their places. Then a walk to the window, looking out at the darkness and the rain. Nothing to see out there, just the reflection of the workshop interior, and beyond it, the deeper black of night. But worth looking at anyway. Worth acknowledging the world beyond these walls, even when it could not be seen. The working lamp on the bench was turned down slightly. The flame shrank, the light dimmed, the shadows in the corners grew deeper. Still enough light to see by, but softer now. More suited to the late hour. A chair was drawn near the stove, and the lantern mender settled into it. Not sleeping, not quite. Just resting in the warmth, watching the embers pulse through the small window in the stove door. The fire had its own rhythm, its own slow breathing of heat and light. The clock continued ticking in the back of the workshop. A sound so constant now that it had become part of the silence, like the beating of a heart that is felt but not heard. The hours moved past without marking their passage, one like another, each one simply another stretch of quiet in a night full of quiet. The shelves of lanterns waited in their rows. The brass fittings, the glass chimneys, the wicks waiting to be lit. Dozens of small possibilities for light held in readiness against whatever darkness might come. They asked nothing. They expected nothing. They simply remained, solid and still and patient. The fire had burned down again to coals. The lantern mender added no more wood. The warmth would hold for a time yet, and there was something pleasant about the slow cooling, like the night itself was settling, finding its way toward the stillness that comes before dawn. The traveler had slipped fully into sleep now, breathing slowly beneath the wool blanket. The dreams that came were quiet ones, full of lamplight and rain and the smell of metal polish. Gentle dreams that asked nothing and offered only rest. In the workshop, nothing stirred. The lanterns on their shelves, the tools on the bench, the spare chimneys in their cabinet. The clock ticking, the rain falling, the fire glowing, all of it held in a balance that did not need to change. The rain had stopped sometime in the hours between midnight and dawn. Its absence was noticeable now, a space where sound had been. The workshop seemed even quieter without it, wrapped in the deeper silence that comes in the last hours of night. The fire in the stove had burned out entirely. The metal still radiated warmth, but there was no glow behind the window now. Just darkness there and the faint smell of wood ash. The lantern mender had not moved from the chair by the stove. Sleep had come at some point, the easy sleep that arrives when the body has worked and the mind has settled. Breathing slow and even, hands resting open in the lap, face softened by rest. The working lamp on the bench had burned down as well. The oil reservoir was nearly empty, the flame reduced to a small blue point barely visible above the wick. It gave almost no light now, just enough to show that it still burned. Other lights had appeared to replace it. Through the windows, the first suggestion of dawn was beginning. Not color yet, not brightness. Just a lightening of the black to something less absolute. The darkness thinning at its edges. The lanterns on the shelves caught this early light in their glass and brass. Faint reflections, barely visible, as if they were waking, each in its own slow way, to acknowledge the approaching day. A bird called somewhere outside. A single note repeated. Then another bird answering from farther away. The first tentative conversation of morning begun while most of the world still slept. The traveler stirred beneath the blanket, but did not wake. The dreams had changed, becoming lighter, rising toward consciousness without quite reaching it. Pleasant suspension between sleep and waking. The workshop held its breath. That quality of stillness that places have when they are waiting for something. Not tense, not expectant. Just aware that change is coming and content to let it arrive in its own time. The eyes of the lantern mender opened slowly. Not startled, not reluctant. Just opening, as eyes do when sleep has finished with them. A moment of looking at nothing in particular, then a slow straightening in the chair, a stretch that traveled from shoulders to fingertips. The nearly exhausted lamp on the bench received attention first. The flame was extinguished with a gentle breath, the wick turned down, the lamp set aside to cool. Its work was done for now. Later, it would be refilled and trimmed and set to burning again. The stove was tended next. Ash scooped into a metal bucket. Fresh kindling arranged on the grate. Paper crumpled beneath it. A match struck, the small flame touching paper, spreading to kindling, beginning the slow work of rebuilding warmth. These were the motions of morning routine, done without thought, without decision. The body knowing what came next, because it had done these things countless mornings before. The light through the windows had grown stronger. Still gray, still soft, but enough now to see by. The working lamp was no longer needed. The workshop had shifted from lamplight hours to daylight hours, a transition so gradual that no single moment marked the chain. The traveler woke to this gray light and the smell of wood smoke. The blanket was warm, the stool somehow still comfortable despite a night of sitting. The body resisted movement, content to remain still a little longer. The lantern mender was at the workbench already, tidying from the night before. Tools returned to their places. Cloths folded and set aside for washing. The surface wiped clean with a damp rag. Order restored for another day of work. The kettle was filled again and set to warm. The blue flame of the spirit burner caught and held. Morning tea would come soon, and with it the full arrival of the day. But there was no rush. The kettle would heat when it heated. The tea would steep when it steeped. Everything in its own time. Through the windows, the sky had begun to show color. Pink at the horizon where the sun would rise. Gray above, fading to blue in the highest reaches. The clouds left by the rain of the night were breaking up, drifting apart to reveal the clear sky behind them. The village was still quiet. No sounds of activity from the inn or the cottages. No smoke from other chimneys yet. Only this workshop awake, this fire burning, this kettle beginning to steam. The traveler rose finally, folding the blanket and setting it on the chair. Muscles stiff from sleeping upright, feet uncertain for the first steps. The wooden floor creaked gently beneath shifting weight. The ritual repeated itself, familiar as breathing. Hot water into warmed pot. Leaves measured from the canister. Water poured in its slow stream. Pot set aside beneath its quilted cover. The same mismatched cups, the blue one and the cream one, with faded flowers. This tea tasted different than the tea of the night before. Lighter somehow, more alert. The tea of waking rather than the tea of settling. The taste of a day beginning rather than a day ending. Outside, the light continued to strengthen. Golden now, where the sun touched the wet grass of the village green. The drops that clung to every surface caught this light and scattered it, turning the whole world into a field of small bright points. The lantern mender stood at the open workshop door, cup in hand, watching this slow illumination. The air that drifted in was cool and damp and fresh, carrying the green smell of rain, washed growing things. A good morning. A morning that did not demand anything but welcomed whatever might come. The shelves of lanterns were lit now by this entering daylight. They looked different in morning light than they had in lamplight. Less magical, perhaps, more ordinary, but still beautiful in their way. Rows of useful things waiting to be useful again. The traveler joined the lantern mender at the door, looking out at the awakening village. Smoke rose now from the chimney of the inn. A door opened somewhere out of sight, and the sound of water being poured into a basin drifted across the green. The day claiming its inhabitants one by one. The railway lamp from the night before sat with the other finished repairs, its red glass glowing in the morning light. Someone would come for it eventually. Someone who needed a light for the back of something, a boat perhaps, or a cart that traveled dark roads. The lamp would go back into the world and do what it was made to do. The hurricane lamp was there too, with its new chimney, and the lamp for miners with its polished reflector. Each one repaired and ready. Each one a small act of preservation, of keeping old things working instead of throwing them away. This was what the workshop did. Day after day, year after year. Lamps came in broken and went out whole. The hands of the lantern mender kept moving, kept tending, kept doing the quiet work that kept the light alive. The morning stretched ahead without urgency. There would be work to do, of course. More lamps waiting on the shelves, each with its own needs. The fire to tend, the tools to maintain, the small, endless tasks that filled the days. But first, there was this. Standing in the doorway with a cup of tea growing cool, watching light spread across a wet green world, breathing air that smelled of rain and wood smoke and the particular scent of this place. The traveler would move on eventually. The road led somewhere, as roads do. Other villages, other workshops, other doorways where morning light fell in just this way. But for now there was no movement, no departure. Just this standing still and watching. Just this being present in a place that asked nothing more. The sign with its painted lantern had stopped swinging in the stillness of the night. It hung motionless now, the gold leaf catching the morning sun. A small bright point marking this workshop, this refuge for broken lamps, this place where light was tended and preserved. Inside, the fire in the stove had caught fully and was beginning to warm the room again. The chill of the night was already fading, replaced by the gentle heat that would hold through the day. The coals glowed red behind the small window of the stove, pulsing with their slow fire breath. The teacups were empty now, set aside to be washed later, along with the cloths and the tools and all the small things that needed tending. But not yet. There was no rush. The morning had only begun, and it would unfold as mornings do, one moment following another in unhurried succession. The lantern mender returned to the workbench and began to sort through the waiting lamps, choosing which would receive attention next. A carriage lamp with a dented frame, a lantern for sailors with a corroded wick mechanism, a simple oil lamp with a cracked base, each one a small puzzle, a small challenge, a small opportunity to make something whole again. The traveler watched for a while longer from the doorway, continuing to grow, the village continuing to wake, the workshop continuing its quiet existence, as it had for years, as it would for years more. Eventually there would be movement, the road calling as roads do. Other places, other people, other mornings and other doorways. But not yet. For now, there was just this. The warmth of the fire, the smell of tea and lamp oil, the sound of small tools being arranged on the workbench, the sight of lanterns waiting in their rows for the patient hands that would mend them. The morning continued. The light continued. The work continued. And somewhere in all of it, there was peace. The lantern mender had chosen the carriage lamp from the shelf. It was a matched pair, actually. 2 lamps meant to hang on either side of a vehicle, their brass frames gone dark with neglect. One had a dent in its frame where something had struck it. Both had wicks that had hardened with age. The work began with disassembly. Each lamp taken apart piece by piece, the components laid out on fresh cloths. Glass panes carefully removed. Burner mechanisms unscrewed. Reflectors detached from their brackets. The frames themselves set aside for reshaping. This was the rhythm of the workshop. The slow taking apart. Careful attention to each piece. The patient work of cleaning and repairing and polishing. Then the putting back together, each part returned to its place, the whole restored to function and beauty. The traveler had settled again, this time in a more comfortable chair that had appeared from somewhere in the back of the workshop. The morning warmth and the quiet sounds of work combined into something deeply restful. Not sleep, but something close to it. A peaceful drifting while remaining aware. Outside, the village had fully awakened. Sounds drifted in through the open door. A cart creaking along the road. Someone calling a greeting to a neighbor. A dog barking once, twice, then falling silent. The normal sounds of a place going about its daily business. But in the workshop, time moved differently. The carriage lamp frames received the full attention of the lantern mender, one after the other. The dent in the first was coaxed out slowly, pressure applied from the inside with a wooden form. The brass yielding gradually, returning to its original shape. The glass panes for the lamps were examined on a light table near the window. Most were intact, but one had a crack that would need replacing. The lantern mender held it up to the daylight, tracing the fracture line with one finger. Arc that had probably been there for years, growing slowly, barely noticed. Replacement glass was found in the cabinet. Cut to size with a glass cutter, the edges smoothed with fine emery paper. The new pane was slightly different in color from the original, a shade more clear. But once installed, with the lamp lit, no one would notice. The light would still fall as it should. The morning passed in this way. Small tasks completed, one after another. The frames of the carriage lamps polished to a warm glow. The burner mechanisms cleaned and oiled. New wicks cut from the roll and fitted into place. Each step bringing the lamps closer to completion. The traveler had found a kind of contentment in this watching. There was nothing required here. No participation expected, no conversation demanded. Just the presence of one person working and another person being still. 2 forms of existence side by side, neither disturbing the other. The fire in the stove burned steadily. The light through the windows shifted as the sun climbed higher. The clock in the back continued ticking, measuring out hours that felt both endless and fleeting. At some point, bread appeared. A small loaf, brown and crusty, that the lantern mender must have baked the day before. It was sliced thick and spread with butter, shared without ceremony. Simple food, eaten standing at the workbench between tasks. The carriage lamps were nearly finished now. Reassembled, polished, their glass panes fitted into frames that held them secure. One lamp complete, then the other. They joined the other finished repairs on the shelf. The railway lamp with its red glass. The hurricane lamp with its new chimney. The lamp for miners with its gleaming reflector. A small collection of restorations, each one a victory over time and neglect. And on the waiting shelves, more lamps still. More dents to smooth. More mechanisms to free. More glass to replace. The work never truly ended. It simply continued, one lamp after another, one day after another, as long as there were lamps to mend and hands to mend them. The quality of light had changed again. The sharp brightness of morning had softened into something warmer, more golden. The sun was past its highest point now, angling in through the workshop windows at a slant that lit dust motes drifting in the air. The lantern mender had paused in the work and was standing at the window, looking out at the village. A contemplative stillness, the kind that comes in the middle of a day that has already accomplished enough. The hands that had been so busy all morning rested now at the sides of the lantern mender. In the village, children had appeared from somewhere. Their voices carried across the green, high and light. They were playing some game that involved running and calling out, their rules invisible to anyone watching from a distance. Simple joy and movement in being young on a pleasant afternoon. The traveler watched them too, from the depth of the comfortable chair, remembering perhaps what it had been like to move like that, without thought or effort. The body that once ran and jumped, now content to sit and observe. The workshop held its afternoon quiet. The fire in the stove had been allowed to burn down to coals again, just enough warmth to take the edge off without making the room too warm. The working lamp on the bench sat unlit, unnecessary in the bright daylight. On the shelves, the lanterns waited in their patient rows. They seemed different in afternoon light than they had in morning light or lamplight. Less urgent somehow. More at peace with their waiting. As if they knew that everything would happen in its own time. The lantern mender returned to the workbench, but did not immediately take up new work. Instead, hands moved over the tools arranged there, touching each one, checking its condition. A small hammer that needed its head tightened. A pair of pliers whose pivot had grown stiff. These two were things that needed tending. A whetstone appeared and a small bottle of oil. The pliers were disassembled, their pivot cleaned and oiled, then reassembled. They moved freely now, opening and closing without resistance. A small repair for a tool that made repairs possible. This was the nature of the work here. Not just mending the lamps, but maintaining the means of mending. The tools cared for so they could care for other things. An endless chain of tending, each link supporting the next. The afternoon stretched ahead, unhurried as the morning had been. There would be more lamp work eventually. The lantern for sailors with its corroded mechanism, waited. The simple oil lamp with its cracked base. Others beyond those, a whole shelf of things that needed attention. But there was time. There was always time. Here in this workshop, where the clock ticked its patient measure and the light moved slowly across the floor. No deadlines pressed. No urgency demanded haste. Just the work and the waiting and the gentle passage of hours. The traveler had grown drowsy again in the afternoon warmth. The chair was comfortable, the sounds of the workshop soothing. Eyes closed slowly, not fighting the pull of rest. There would be time for waking later. There would be time for everything. The day had turned without announcement. The light through the windows had taken on the quality of honey again, that particular golden tone that belongs only to the hours before sunset. The shadows in the workshop had lengthened, stretching across the floor in slow motion. The lantern mender had worked through the afternoon on the lantern for sailors. Its mechanism had been stubborn, the corrosion worse than it appeared. But patience had prevailed, as patience often does. The parts that had been frozen now moved freely. The wick rose and fell at the turn of a dial. The traveler had woken at some point and now sat watching the final stages of this repair. The lantern for sailors being reassembled, each piece fitting with others. The glass chimney settled into its frame. The carrying handle attached. A lamp that had seen hard use on rough waters, ready to see more. Outside, the voices of the children had faded. The village was settling into its evening rhythms. Smoke rose from chimneys as dinners were prepared. Doors opened and closed as people moved between home and yard and street. The ordinary sounds of a place ending its day. The workshop door still stood open to the cooling air. The breeze that drifted in carried the smell of wood smoke and cut grass, and somewhere, very faintly, bread baking. The last warmth of the sun reached across the threshold, making a golden rectangle on the worn wooden floor. The working lamp on the bench was lit again, though it was not quite needed yet. The flame caught and steadied, adding its small warmth to the fading daylight. Soon it would be the only light here, as it had been the night before. The cycle continuing. The finished lantern for sailors joined the others on the repair shelf. The traveler counted them silently. The railway lamp. The hurricane lamp died. The lamp for miners. The matched carriage lamps. And now this one, with its brass burnished by sea, salt, and time. A good day of work, counted in lamps that would light again. The lantern mender began the evening tidying. Tools returned to their places. The workbench wiped clean. The leftover lunch cleared away. Small tasks that marked the transition from working hours to resting hours. The fire in the stove was built up again, fresh wood laid on coals that still glowed faintly from the afternoon. The flames caught and grew, their light dancing through the small window in the stove door. Warmth radiated outward, pushing back the evening chill. The kettle was filled. The spirit burner lit, tucking. The familiar preparation for tea beginning again, the same ritual that had been performed the night before and would be performed again tomorrow. Some things did not need to change. The traveler rose from the comfortable chair and stretched slowly. The body was rested now, ready for movement. The road waited somewhere beyond the village, leading wherever roads led. But not yet. There was still tea to drink, still evening to watch fall. The two figures stood at the workshop door together, looking out at the village settling into darkness. The first stars appearing in the deepening blue above. The lights coming on in windows, one by one, as families gathered for their evening meals. It was the same view that had greeted the arrival of the traveler, but different now. Known somehow, in the way that places become known when you have spent time in them. The curve of the road, the shape of the inn, the cottage with its hollyhocks, now closed against the night, familiar as a face seen many times. The tea was ready, poured into the same mismatched cups, the blue one and the cream one with faded flowers. The taste was the same as it had been, dark and slightly bitter, exactly right for evening. The warmth of the cup fitting perfectly in the hands. The working lamp cast its pool of light across the workbench. The fire crackled softly in the stove. The shelves of lanterns held their patient vigil, waiting for the work of tomorrow. Everything in its place, everything as it should be. The evening continued as evenings do, unhurried and undemanding. The darkness grew. The stars multiplied. The village went quiet, one household at a time, until only this workshop remained awake, its windows glowing with lamplight and firelight. The night had settled fully over the village. The same darkness that had wrapped around the workshop the night before had returned, as it always did, as it always would. The world beyond the windows existed only as an idea, a memory of light. The working lamp on the bench burned steadily, its flame trimmed to exactly the right height. The fire in the stove had found its rhythm, the coals pulsing with slow red breath. Two sources of warmth, two sources of light, holding back the dark. The lantern mender had taken up small work again. Not repair this time, but creation. Hands were winding cotton around a thin metal core, making a new wick for some future lamp. The motion was repetitive, meditative. Around and around, the cotton building up in neat layers. The traveler watched from the comfortable chair, wrapped again in the wool blanket that smelled of cedar and lamp oil. The drowsiness of evening had returned, settling over the body like a second blanket. Eyes grew heavy, opened, grew heavy again. There was no need to fight it. Sleep would come when it came, as it had the night before. The workshop would hold its quiet vigil, the lamps would wait on their shelves, the fire would burn down to coals, and the lamp would burn down to nothing. And morning would arrive eventually, as morning always did. The wick making continued. Around and around, the cotton growing thicker on its metal core. A small creation, nothing remarkable, but something that would someday carry a flame, would someday turn oil into light. Something useful being made by careful hands. The sounds of the workshop were the same as they had been. The tick of the clock, the soft crackle of the fire, the small sounds of work, and beneath it all, the silence that was not quite silence, the held breath of a place at peace. The village outside slept, the inn with its windows dark, the cottages with their doors closed against the night. Even the stream behind the workshop seemed quieter now, its murmur reduced to a whisper, everything resting. The lantern mender finished the wick and set it aside with others, a small bundle of potential light waiting in a drawer. The hands that had worked all day finally rested, folded loosely in the lap. The eyes that had focused on mechanisms and glass and brass now looked at nothing in particular. This was the hour of letting go. The work of the day was done. The work of tomorrow waited. Between them was this space of stillness, this gap where nothing was required and nothing was demanded. The traveler had slipped into sleep again, breathing slowly beneath the wool blanket. Whatever dreams came were quiet ones, full of lamplight and warmth and the smell of a place that had become familiar. The night continued its slow passage. The stars turned overhead, though no one watched them. The darkness held, though no one measured it. The hours moved past like water in a stream, flowing without effort toward whatever came next. The working lamp burned lower, its reservoir of oil diminishing. The fire in the stove had fallen to embers again, that deep red glow that gave warmth without light. The workshop grew darker, the shadows deepening in corners and along the shelves. The lanterns waited there in the dimness. Rows of brass and glass, each one a small possibility. They asked nothing. They expected nothing. They simply remained, solid and patient and still. And in the chair by the stove, the eyes of the lantern mender had closed as well. Sleep coming as it comes to everyone eventually, stealing in on quiet feet, settling over the body like a gentle hand. The breathing slowed. The stillness deepened. The workshop held them both now. The traveler in the chair by the door. The lantern mender in the chair by the stove. Two sleepers in a room full of waiting light, surrounded by the work of days past and days to come. The night asked nothing of them. The darkness made no demands. There was only this: the warmth slowly fading, the light slowly dimming, the silence growing deeper. The hours continued their passage. The world outside continued its turning. And in the workshop, surrounded by lanterns that would someday shine again, the sleepers rested. Nothing needed to happen. Nothing needed to change. The night simply continued, as nights do, moving without hurry toward whatever morning would bring. The fire breathed its last warmth. The lamp held its last light. And the quiet went on, and on, and on. The lanterns wait on their shelves. The fire has burned to embers. The workshop holds its peace. And wherever you are now, may you rest as gently as light resting in glass.